I was just going to remind you to start recording. Derek wanted me to be sure that everything got recorded, but thanks.
Thanks, Lindsay.
About the draft for talk, do you want us to do the review? Do you want us to put the picture and everything with that draft, or just like talking about the idea?
For which assignment?
For doing interview with the students 30 minutes or something.
Well, let's pull that up. Let's pull that assignment up so that we make sure we understand what's happening for expectations for what's happening here.
Is that in this class? Yes, it's a STEM, I believe. Yeah.
So again, the overarching idea of this particular assignment is to just have a chance to be able to like give something to someone that you know that you're able to talk to either in person or in Zoom. And then just have like a conversation, kind of get them to talk about their own reasoning, what happened when they were doing it, things along those lines. And it just gives you some thoughts along the you know, maybe give them something that they can write with. If you're doing it over Zoom, you can't do that necessarily. And then just write down as much as you can remember from the conversation, and then write a short idea. Now, I don't really have a limit, like how long this needs to be. Would that be helpful? I kind of like leaving it open-ended, but I realize that some people want a little bit more, kind of like our conversation last week with the like writing prompts. Some people like the open, some people wanted something more prompt. Like, do you all want me to put like a page limit?
Okay, it's just like about the draft. Do we need to include the pictures of the staff, for example, or just talk about it because we have a draft and then we have the final?
Right.
So for the,
I'll get there in just 2 seconds. I promise. I want to kind of get the overarching assignment first, and then I'm going to address your exact question. I promise. The thing that I was kind of thinking, again, this isn't major. I was thinking along the lines of like one page where you might have the actual thing that you had them do and pictures, and then maybe at most 2 pages of writing.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of that, you don't have to do pictures. It just might be helpful if there are things that you do. Because again, this is just you kind of like doing almost like a blog, like a reflection on kind of what you've learned about someone, just not necessarily you teaching anything, just someone going through, and kind of like we do with our recess, having a chance to be able to kind of just dive in. Now, in terms of the draft, so like our conversation that we're going to do on Thursday, it's really going to be kind of giving you a chance to maybe share. We're going to do some peer review stuff. And so depending on what stage you're at, if you're just like picking out your task, you can share your task with somebody and talk about that. Or if you're further along, you can kind of like talk about the process and kind of share ideas. That's what I'm thinking. And I still think that makes sense for now, since that's the plan for part of Thursday's class. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Just so you said we could interview essentially anyone. It doesn't have to be a child? Okay.
No, it could be friend, spouse. I was about to say dog. That might be tricky. But there's no bounds to what it is. The whole idea is to just have a chance to have someone like try something and then hear from them what they've reasoned. The next phase of this assignment, you'll actually be like building the task over the next couple of weeks, and then actually try to teach online, teach to them, or in person if you're someone close who you live with. And then talk more about like the teaching and learning aspect. So this is kind of like the dry run, like a reflection, so that you can start thinking about like, what am I learning when someone does something? And then I can give you feedback specifically on like ways to think about that reasoning, so that when you get to the assignment where you're actually creating a task and somehow teaching it, you'll have a chance kind of like have some ideas of things to think about.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't like maybe trying to find a bounds of like eloquent reasoning. Like if you're trying to present something, if you're like trying to get someone who wouldn't understand like totally, and then you'd have to move along, or like would someone like pick it up and you'd be like, okay, and you know.
Nope. For this, the whole idea of this part of the assignment is to just like starting to think about like when someone does something that you ask them to do or you have them work through, what did you learn from that experience? What did you learn about learning? That's the
So is it
entire
kind of
like,
like, is it like the anticipating part of the 5 practices kind of?
yeah, that's kind of along the lines of how I thought about that and then why I added this kind of piece to the assignment, because for me, I'm really super excited about down the road, at the end of this module, when you're getting a chance to actually like teach a small task to somebody, in some way, shape, or form. I don't want you to be, this is the first time for you to kind of like reflect on what you've learned about learning, right? I want to have kind of like a very kind of low stress. I was talking to somebody and we were working through something, and these are some of the things they said, and this is what I think it means. It kind of gives you a chance, kind of like a literally like a rough draft talk on reasoning and learning about learning. And that, because again, that's I think one of the most important things for us to get out of this class. Sound
I
good?
don't know if I don't know if this will complicate things in any way, but are you opposed to, like, I was thinking about working with my niece and nephew. Like, we have 2 students. Is that okay? Or
Yeah, no, I mean that's totally fine. That adds something to it, and I'll leave that up to you. Like you can write about both of them, or you can just choose to write about one of them. And it could be interesting to be able to get a sense of like there are 2 different people that did the same task, and this is what I think that they learned. This is what I got out of that opportunity. So yeah, if you want to, go for it. As I said, it's a little bit more work, but that's fine.
So, I think you touched on it a little bit already, but for the rough draft talk assignment, would you prefer stuff like already completed the interview, or is it okay for still like coming up with like the before the interview things?
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was mentioning earlier. Like, so if you want help on like the task itself, right? So this rough draft thing is like whatever level that you have done, you're going to submit. You're also going to bring to class on Thursday, and we're going to pair folks off, and you're going to have some time to be able to like share. I'll have some kind of prompts for you to go through to kind of think about like how can we support each other through this assignment.
Okay, thanks.
And so currently we have this due in a week. I'll likely be extending that timeline, but let's talk more about it on Thursday at the end of class. What I'm trying to say is that I'm not super stressed about this timeline. So we'll leave it at that for now, but I have an feeling we'll probably extend that timeline after our conversation on Thursday. Sound good? And then so the goal of this is that the second phase of this assignment will be like the task analysis. And so some of you that are in the math class with me, the World of Different Numbers class, that's what you've been doing. It'll be a kind of a similar format where you'll go through and we'll have some time in class to kind of like build a task. And then this time, and the focus is going to be on you actually trying to think about how you can instruct someone through the tasks instead of just giving it to them and kind of like, this is what I learned about learning. This time around, you're actually going to go through and teach it. And then you're going to reflect on some of the things that we talk about in the next couple of weeks in class. And so that's the part 2 of that. And so the preference is that it's the same person. It doesn't have to be, because again, I want to try to be as flexible as possible through that. We're getting through this, right? Because so once this kind of that assignment's done, then the last assignment will be near the end where you're going to like go through and plan 2 lesson plans. And so that's it. That's kind of the whole class. We're kind of flying along. I know it's a lot of work still, but we are really getting through this. You all are getting through this. How's everyone feeling today? All right, okay. So today we're going to dive into a couple of different topics. We're going to like dive into what exactly it means like to be a task. And we're also going to talk about this idea of inquiry, because I think that inquiry is a really important part of the work that we do in math and science. And so I'm going to be a little bit boring, and I'm actually going to forego recess so that we have more time to kind of like play today. So I'm actually going to talk a little bit about play, which seems like counterintuitive. It's like the opposite. But I was doing a lot of reading this morning, and I just kind of saw some interesting things that are kind of happening in the world of ed right now, and how we're thinking about like what it means to come back. So we're going to just a couple of things I want to share, and then we're going to just kind of do some activities throughout and wrap up with some questions, and we'll be done for the day. It's exciting. Last night I was doing interviews for the program, and I think that there were 6 more math and science students. So you all are going to be kind of going through at a really interesting time. Usually, as I said, this class is like anywhere from 4 to 6 students, this one that we're in. And so you're never kind of in classes with more than 3 or 4 students at a time. But like for you all that are going to be in your content courses, it's going to be much closer to probably like 15 students in the class. I think it's going to lead to some really interesting discussions, and it's kind of exciting that we have more folks that are interested in being math and science educators. So it was really kind of a cool night last night to get a chance to meet some more folks that are going to be starting in the fall. And so I came upon this morning randomly, and let's see if I can find the article. Oh no. There was something that came out this morning on CNN about what schools will look like when we come back in the fall and spring and so on and so forth. And they said that they hope that this becomes the golden age of play in education. So I was like, yes. And it was written by kind of a very famous Finnish educator, Pasi Sahlberg. And which led me to like download one of his books this morning. And while I've been waiting here before y'all, I've been like reading a bunch from this book. And this is, as I was thinking about recess, this was one of the lines in the first chapter that really hit me. You know, several times a week, children will choose, in a way, what they'd like to do in class. Recess periods will consist mostly of outdoor free play managed with children themselves, with a trained adult nearby to keep things safe. You gotta take risks. Children will sometimes scrape their knee and get sweaty and dirty and wet because that's what children naturally do. Schools will recognize that children have this urgent need, the right to play outside several times a day and to enjoy regular breaks outside the classroom. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is what we've been talking about in this class for 2 weeks. And so in the book itself, and I'll actually show you what the name of the book. It's interesting. It kind of looks at the way that we think about play through kind of educational change and policy. But kind of some of that stuff, talking about what play is, it's self-initiated and self-motivated. It's creative, it's active. It still has rules, but they're negotiated, right? And so when you all start your internships in the beginning of the semester, one of the things I really want you to focus on when you meet with your cooperating teachers is how do they set up the norms of the classroom? What do they do in those first couple of days so that they can start building community? Because if you want to be able to have like really cool conversations, thinking back to like the 5 practices we've talked about for the last little while, you have to set those rules up right at the beginning. You can't kind of in November say, you know what, I want to start having cool conversations with my students because I've been lecturing since August. What's going to happen is that it's going to crash and burn. It's going to fall apart. And it's not your fault necessarily. It's just that those aren't the norms. That's not the way the class is set up. And so when you start your internships, pay attention to how your teacher sets up discussion. Because again, if your cooperating teacher is lecturing about photosynthesis, and then you decide for the very first time you do a formal observation that you're going to have them talk in groups, and they've never done that before, this is not going to go well. It just doesn't. And so this idea of like making sure that you negotiate and have these conversations right at the beginning of the school year is so vitally important so that you can have really cool conversations. I want to see if there are any other quotes. I was like feverishly reading this morning. This was kind of terrifying. By the age of 3, screen time becomes the dominant way for children to play. That by the age of 7, children have spent up to 2 years and 3 months in front of a screen. And then I highlighted so many things. So there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. And so I think it's going to be, really important, all these conversations that we've had over the first couple of weeks, although it hasn't been completely focused on like the pedagogy we've been thinking about and trying to dive into recess and play. And it's going to be so vitally important as education changes. So for today, here's our folder. I don't know if I had that up earlier or not, but here's our folder if you all want to hop on. And then have any of you all used, I'm assuming in some of the other classes you guys have used Padlet before? Has anyone not used Padlet before? If you haven't used Padlet before, if you could go to padlet.com and just kind of register, it's free. And so to kick things off today, and that's fine if you're still kind of going through and registering or getting in. I'd like to start off thinking about this idea that's connected. I think the word that we use the most when we think about secondary education in math and science, when we think about play, the word that comes up the most is this idea of inquiry. And so I want us to take a couple of minutes to just kind of reflect on what we think that even means. What do we mean by inquiry in the work that we're doing? And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to use a Padlet here. So if you look on slide 5, or if you just copy this bit.ly link, bit.ly / and remember to keep things in the proper form, capital STME 62519. I want you to click on that link, and it's going to lead us to a Padlet. And so Padlet's just kind of like a mind mapping tool that allows folks to be able to kind of share. If you've registered, the free account allows you to have the 3 Padlets. then you can pay to kind of different levels to have different numbers. But all I want you to do is we're going to take about 5 minutes, and I want you to come up and just write in here what you think your definition of inquiry is. And the way that you do that, you'll see kind of in the bottom here, the little plus symbol. If you click on one of those, it'll give you a spot where you can kind of go through and write your ideas. Does anyone have any questions? Or are folks all there?
Can you send the link for the drive? I couldn't find it. Something went wrong.
Sure. To get into the drive, I'll email it to you, Misha.
Okay, because I put
Did
the
you get
link
into?
and I don't-
Did you get into the to the Padlet?
Yes.
And it's, where is the drive? I never know where to find that link for the presentation.
Yeah, yeah, it's right at the beginning of the presentation. I showed it, but I'll email it to you as well, Andy. I also put them up in the day's Canvas shell as well. Thanks for letting me know, team. So both of you should have that now.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, let's take 5 minutes and just, I want you to write, just have a chance to be able to sit and think, what does inquiry actually mean to you?
And this is on the peer work? No.
That's on the Padlet. And so if you need to find that, there's a link to that on slide 5 in the face-to-face number 5 slides. All right, it says about a minute left. Do folks need another minute, or are we feeling okay? So I'd love to hear just kind of a couple of folks share their overall thoughts. What does inquiry mean? I know that we've got them kind of in front of us, but I'd like to hear what folks are thinking if maybe 2 or 3 people want to share.
Yeah, I think inquiry is having a healthy want to understand anything that's going on around you. So it could be, as simple as what's going on with your finances to why does, tumbleweed do whatever, just anything, just whatever you're observing. Inquiry would be to sift through what you're observing and try to find meaning as to why you're observing that and what you could take away or learn from or ask further questions about or link to something else. I guess.
Yeah, cool. I like that idea of sifting through phenomenon. I really like that phrase. Thanks. Let's hear a couple more. What were you thinking when you were writing this? I love that the word wonder came up a couple of times. Misha.
Actually, I didn't have the chance to write anything about this, but because I don't know where should I go to write. I was looking all the time.
Yeah.
I know,
well, if you see
yeah.
down in the bottom corner here, that little pink plus, you just click on that. Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier. Yeah. We'll have another chance to kind of continue this conversation in a second, so you can definitely write something.
Okay, thank you.
1 or 2 others.
Like in education, I kind of thought it was just having a discussion or posing questions with students that stems beyond just answering the basic facts that we usually talk about in K through 12 education.
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways to think about inquiry. I'm glad you brought that up. You almost kind of ruined my punchline. I'm not gonna we're going to talk about that exact. No, I'm totally kidding. But we are. That's exactly where we're going to go with this in a little bit. But you're right. There are a couple of different ways. Inquiry kind of means a couple of things, but I like that you're connecting it to questioning, because that's this idea of and how I think that we can connect all this to play is that we want students to have the opportunities to ask questions, and if they're doing worksheets, they're not asking questions, they're just doing a thing. They're not engaging, they're not excited, it's not meaningful. And that's what I think is really important. So what we're gonna do one more quick thing with this before we move on. We're gonna take another couple of minutes. And what I want you to do is to go back to what it is you've written in here and either, expand upon it if you want or write upon it. But what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at everyone else's. And I'm sure that you had a bit of a chance to do that. But when you're looking at everyone else's, I want you to think about what you were thinking, and I want you to think about this quick conversation that we just had, and look at other ones. And what I want you to do is to try and see how yours might connect to someone else's idea. So like, for example, here's Lindsay's right here, and she's talking about collecting data, making observations, recording, curiosity, seeking answers, discovery, which are all like the things that we were just talking about. What I want you to do, Lindsay, for yours is to look at all the other ones and see if you find something that connects to what you said to someone else's. And what you're going to do, and everyone kind of pay attention here so that you know how to do it, is you're actually going to just draw a connection. So if you click on your own Padlet post, you'll see that you can either edit it, delete it, or do some other things. The More Actions button. If you click on More Actions, one of the things you can do is connect to a post. And if you click on that, it just says that you can go through and then make a connection. So we're going to do a little like quick mind map activity. So take a couple of minutes, read through everyone's activity, and then think about one that you think really connects to your idea. And then go through again. I'm going to do this again. Click on the 3 dots, the ellipsis, connect to a post, and then choose one of them to connect to. And then I want to come back and hear some folks' thoughts on how their stuff connect. Does that make sense? All right, let's take maybe 3 minutes, and then we'll come back and chat.
Excuse me, Dennis, when I hit this, I couldn't find the connect thing. There's edit, delete, and something else, but not connect.
Yeah, so is it a little dot, dot, dot ellipsis?
Yes.
Click on the ellipsis. And one of the options, drop-down options, should be make a connection.
There's nothing, like there's edit, pause, transfer, copy, expand, and delete. That's all what I have.
If it's not showing up, then that's okay. Just go through and take a look and pick one that you think makes a connection. And then if you want to talk about it when we come back in a minute or so. All right, let's come back. So this looks awesome. You guys did such a good job on this. And so look at all of these. All of you kind of independently had a chance to be able to dive into this and And then look at all these connections that we made. And I love how you even kind of tag some of these connections. Can anyone, maybe we'll get maybe 2 people to share and talk about their connections that they made and what they thought. If there are maybe 2 people that haven't had a chance to share yet today.
Oh, we were only supposed to do 1 connection, so I only did that. But I mean, I connected, I think, almost with everybody's post in some regard. But the official connection was to Jesse's post, and you know, what I had was kind of questioning and critically thinking for yourself. So that kind of showed up in his post quite a bit. So that's the reason why I chose that one.
Good. Awesome connection. Thank you. Maybe one more?
I connected with Mitch's because like we both had that idea of like wondering, and then when I said moving beyond the what to like the why and how, I feel like that matched up with his idea of rather than comprehension, it's more about like the wonder and the how and the curiosity. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those are great connections. And those are the things that wonder is literally one of my favorite words. And I think that it really connects to like, how do we build this interest? We've been talking about our own kind of like identities, and you all finished up your identity journey maps, which were awesome. I'm going to get a chance to start diving into those, and I think what we'll spend a little bit of time starting to let you all share them actually in class on Thursday, so that everyone can see what everyone did, because I think you all did a great job. But all of these ideas are connected to the way that we create excitement and a connection to our own identity in the content that we dive into. And that's where I wanted to start us off and start thinking about today as we dive into this new kind of module 2 for this class. Because our focus for this next couple of weeks is on small bits of teaching in our class. We're going to dive into these very like moments where students have the ability and opportunity to do something that you're going to instruct them in. So this next couple of weeks, we're going to dive into the tasks, like small pieces of what happens within a lesson plan and what that looks like. And we're going to focus on well, today is going to be, what is a task? What do we mean by a task? What makes a good task in math and science? And then we're going to start building out like, well, how demanding is the task? We're going to talk about how do we kind of create questions to really dive into getting at what students learn about the task. We're going to talk about language demands in math and science and how that connects to task. We're going to start building up these ideas of like, how do we teach small bits so that we can then have a really good basis when we start into our lesson planning. Where are we? So let's kind of, I added this in here, what is inquiry? And this gets at kind of like a 2 different way to look at it on slide 6. So kind of all the things that you all were talking about, this idea of like active learning that starts with questioning, problems, scenarios, instead of just presenting facts and having them read or watch you do things. And so that's kind of, when we talk about like excitement, fun, learning, play in math and science, that's the definition. That's the thing that we have folks do. We want to have lots of inquiry when we're teaching. But connected to that, there's a broader idea of inquiry in the field of education. And I have this quote here from Marilyn Cochran-Smith, who's actually the head of the doctoral program that I went through. I think that there's something like 10% of all education dissertations quote Marilyn in some way, shape, or form. It's some insane number. She's a terrifying woman. I have the utmost respect for her, but she is a terrifying person. And she writes, the continual process of questioning and using the data of practice to investigate those questions critically and collaboratively is fundamentally this notion of inquiry as a stance. And what Marilyn says is that the work that we do as teachers, we're not just really teachers, we're also kind of teacher researchers. And what we need to do is we need to question, we need to collect data, we need to really understand what it is our students know if we're going to be effective teachers. So she argues that teachers aren't just teachers, they're actually teacher researchers. And so as we try to get students excited and have them do questioning, we need to do questioning in our own practice. So this idea of kind of using that excitement in the field of education to really dive into formative assessment and to really dive into things that we can do so that we learn everything we need to learn about student learning. And so I kind of wanted to put both of those definitions up there just kind of as an aside to kind of think about, like, not only are we trying to build excitement and wonder and have students question, we need to be questioning our own practice as we go. But our focus for the next couple of weeks is going to be on these tasks. And the definition that comes out of NSTA, actually, which is the National Science Teachers Association, is that a task is a problem or set of problems that focuses on students' attention on a particular idea and or provides an opportunity to develop or use a particular habit of mind. And so within a lesson, there is often several different tasks that we're going to ask you to do. So like today, I've asked you to do a task where I asked you about inquiry and you had to use Padlet to do that. In class on, what day is today? Is today Tuesday? Today's Tuesday. In class on Thursday, there were a number of different tasks that I asked you to do. Sometimes I sent you off into a breakout room. Sometimes I had you work in pairs on that game of Sprouts. And then I came back and had you answer some questions about it, and we had a discussion about it. There were lots of different tasks. And what I want you to do is to just kind of like get a sense of your own thoughts on tasks. And so I have a Google Doc here to click on. That's called task. It's also just in our folder. And I want you to kind of like, what makes a really good task? What do you think makes something that would be interesting for students? What do you think are the components, things that would make an activity or thing that you would ask your students to do a rich task or a good task? So we're going to take a couple of minutes. I want you to just write down your thoughts. Everyone kind of share kind of thoughts. And you can do bulleted lists. You can just write a paragraph, rewrite whatever you feel like doing. The anonymous box is already into it. And then I also have this other task here, which is just something that I pulled out of a random textbook, where it has kind of like a scale, and it says, you know, determine the mass of 3 marbles, things along those lines. Share a couple of, again, similar in sentence or bulleted list. Is this a rich task, do you think? Why or why not? So let's take a little bit of time and just kind of share out some thoughts. What makes a rich task, and then your thoughts on this particular task. And we'll come back. I'll check in about 5 minutes, and then we'll see how we're doing. Is everyone into this document? Thumbs? Okay.
I am not in there. And I went on the files to find the face-to-face number 5 slides, and the link is not in there either.
Yeah, I'm kind of having the same issue.
That would be good to know. Cool. So what do you need? You need just the link to today's files.
Yes, please.
I'm just going to email it out to the class.
Thank you.
We'll go for about another minute and 30, and then I want to hear some thoughts. All right. So I'm gonna share here. What I might start doing is I might just, when I send out my announcements, I'll add the link to the files in there so that you all have an easy access to that too. I just tend to, like, I'm always working on it until like 5 minutes before we start. So as long as you are okay that it's probably going to be in rough draft form until class starts, we'll do it that way. And so here, kind of, just for a second to kind of summarize kind of your thoughts on this idea of like rich tasks. And I loved all of these that there are. You know, the first person wrote, you know, that it's open-ended. And again, like open-ended isn't always everything that we can do, but we want to try to like tend towards open-ended. Like students are going to have to learn how to use the quadratic formula or to use kind of a lot of the formulas that we use in physics. And so, you know, teaching how to use those formulas sometimes can work out as open-ended, but sometimes it has to be kind of a little bit direct instruction. But to focus on this idea of open-ended is perfect. And then we also wrote different strategies. And so in terms of different strategies, do we mean like different strategies to solve? Or there are different strategies to kind of like dive into it? Either way, yes. You know, ways to be able to have students use like different tools and materials. You know, it's really nice to be able to think about the different types of like educational tools that we can use, but sometimes like even having them use professional tools to solve the things that we're doing is really good. It gets them thinking about different things that they can do. Ways to start discussion, so important. Like all of these things, real life application, rooms for reflection. Is it applicable? These are all the things that we want to do when we build our rich tasks and what we should be thinking about. And, you know, sometimes we're going to be given the curriculum for us to do. And it might be just very kind of process-based tasks. And so sometimes we're like, well, that's how we're going to teach it. And other times we can think about, well, how do we adapt that? And that might be an interesting conversation for us to have later down the road in this class is, what do I do if I'm just given like a process thing to do? How do I think about adapting it? That's not something we necessarily do a lot of covering in this program, but it might be interesting conversations to have as we wrap up this semester. And so I gave you this thing that came out of a textbook from like the 70s. I'm pretty sure that I did this activity. I remember that picture from my childhood. And then I asked you to kind of think about, is it a rich task? And pretty much everyone said no. Can anyone talk to me a little bit about their reasoning and what they thought when they saw this?
I said ultimately no, but I said it does, I think, depend to some extent. I think there might be some students that could consider this to be a rich task, depending on their background. I think the majority, well, not the majority, but a significant portion of the students probably would not find this practical or would question how this relates to their life. But like I said, I think students, maybe there are some students that are kind of, they need this guidance and direction, and they connect to it from some perspective that I'm just not really clear about.
Mm-hmm. Are these kind of important skills, things for students to learn in an activity like this?
I think it's kind of important to know how to use this instrument. I mean, in science especially, like if you're in a lab and you don't understand the precision of weighing stuff out, that's how things go wrong. You know, like if you are supposed to only put in 2.5 grams of something and you actually put in 25 grams of something, you know, like your experiment's going to fail. So like to actually understand the intricacies of using the machine. And then like kind of what Greg was saying, like, you know, like I'm pretty sure water, it's a gram per mil. So that's how much it weighs. Like 1 mil of water weighs 1 gram. I think that's what it, but so it's like, you know, for people who want to be, you know, aquatic engineers or something, you know, maybe that's something where they could like kind of compare those things, and down the road they can use that information, you know, for their own knowledge. Or so it could be in depth. Yeah. Kind of what Greg's saying, depending on the background or the passion of the student.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking too about everyday life. I mean, I see like balances and stuff like that in the grocery store. I mean, when we're weighing like fruits or vegetables and produce and stuff like that. So, I mean, maybe it's something that kids would want to learn how to use so they can like manage money. I mean, different weights of things weigh, or like they cost different amounts. So
Yeah, absolutely. So you could even take it and adapt it for a scenario that might be meaningful, right? You could take this and adapt it in some way, shape, or form. That would be a cool way to kind of like dive into it. How does that connect to something that you do in the grocery store? Awesome. One of the reasons why I chose this is that, you know, kind of like switching gears, this is, I think, mostly kind of like a science-focused task. But say that we bring this into a math classroom and use this to be able to collect some data, right? Have students use some scales or use some sort of something along those lines to be able to collect data and use that data to do statistics, other things. Look at some of the formulas that we might use in physics connected to some of this, right? The task becomes a little bit different then, doesn't it? Because now we're trying to like build something, we're trying to do like real meaningful data in theory, maybe not. The students might be like, whatever, I don't care about this. But we might be able to use it in something along those lines in a math class a little bit differently.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
So like in tasks like this in your class, would you recommend that we would tell them like the purpose of the task before we give it to them? Because I feel like a lot of students, like if they saw this, they'd be like, why am I doing this? What am I supposed to learn? Because I remember I felt like that in science a lot. Like I would be doing these experiments and I had no idea what I was supposed to be learning. So would you recommend like laying out like this is the purpose of the task, like this is what we want you to learn, or do you leave it more open-ended so that they discover that?
I have two thoughts on this that both kind of lead in the same direction. And let me get this straight, Aubrey. I think your idea is that you're like do you want to kind of give the punchline away at the very beginning and tell them this is why we're doing this? Or do you want to leave it so that they kind of have an aha moment at the end? Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Yeah.
So yeah, so in terms of that, I would really recommend, like, it depends on how you set up the task. So if this is something that you do at the very beginning of a unit, maybe you don't want to give it away, right? Again, and you'll have to make a decision. You might want to leave it open-ended so that they figure some of that out itself. And I think it'll change depending on like what you're teaching in the scenario. Other times you might, like later on, if you're kind of doing this as a task in the middle, you might want to specifically say, but for me personally, and this is kind of a learned thing, because I was always like, oh, I want to make sure that every lesson I do has some sort of aha moment, which is exhausting. I think kind of one of the most important things that you can do is to explain pedagogically why you're doing what you're doing as often as you can. Because like at the very beginning of your class, you'll probably have some sort of like objective that you'll have at the front of the board, and you want students to kind of like know why you're like what you're doing for the day. You want to make sure throughout that lesson that you come back to that, so that they're reminded why they're doing what they're doing. So you kind of explaining your pedagogical choices. We're doing this activity right now because is really helpful. Do you remember back to the objective at the beginning of class? Yeah, this is why we're doing this right now, because this connects directly to whatever the topic is. And some of the most effective teachers I've said are just like, even like, the reason why I'm putting you in groups for this activity is because, not just like get into groups and do this worksheet. I'm putting you in a group right now for this reason. Now go do it. Does that help? That's probably more than what you asked for.
No, that was good.
I think it's kind of important to think about that. There's this one teacher who just retired at DCIS who was a science teacher, and he had taught for a very long time. And he had set it up, every lesson that he taught started out with a student-driven skit that was around the objective for the day. So like he would pick 3 or 4 students, and then sometimes there'd be like the whole group would like have to respond, and they'd be like, hey, Joey, I was walking down the street and I noticed blah, 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 blah. Oh my goodness. And then they would go through and they'd have to act out this skit that explained what the objective was, instead of him just like having it up at the front of the board. And then later on, he'd be like, remember when like Joey was talking about this? This is why we're doing this, because this is the thing that we're trying to learn. And so being very clear in your pedagogical choices is kind of an important aspect. So you have to kind of weigh it out. Do I need the aha moment right now? Or do I just want to be like as damn clear as possible on what it is I'm doing and why I'm doing it? Awesome, thank you all. This is our goal. We're going to dive into tasks. And I think now we're actually going to get a chance to play with a task finally. And so what we're going to break off into groups. So this is the point where I'm going to need books and rollable objects and measuring implements and things along those lines, because we're going to do an investigation that affects motion and how things move. And before we do that, we're actually going to watch a children's story. Is anyone familiar with this children's story, Sheep in a Jeep? This is one of my daughter's favorite stories. There's a whole like sheep series, but she loves this. She loves this Sheep in a Jeep story. So we're actually just going to listen to someone read the story. It's going to be about 4 minutes. Sheep in a Jeep. Can I get some thumbs up if you all hear the sound?
Welcome to your Houghton Mifflin book and CD favorite, Sheep in a Jeep, written by Nancy Shaw and illustrated by Margot Apple. You can follow along with the story and enjoy the pictures.
Beep, beep. in a Jeep on a hill that's steep. Uh-oh, the Jeep won't go. Sheep leap to push the Jeep. Sheep shove. Sheep grunt. Sheep don't think to look up front. Jeep goes splash. Jeep goes thud. Jeep goes deep in gooey mud. Sheep tug. Sheep shrug. Sheep yelp. Sheep get help. Jeep comes out. Sheep shout. Sheep cheer. Oh dear, the driver sheep forgets to steer. Jeep in a heap. Sheep weep. Sheep sweep the heap. Jeep for sale. Cheap.
All right, so incredibly cheesy story. Also, and pardon the pun, a crash course in Newton's laws of motion. So what's some of the motions? What are some of the things that you noticed in the book that were happening in terms of like things moving?
Like by the arc of the story, or you mean like physical movement within the story?
Yeah, just physical movement. I like that, but let's just talk about physical movement.
Well, there was inertia described, I guess. So objects in motion stay in motion. Objects not in motion, tend to not be in motion. So force, I guess, being involved.
And along that, like Newton's second law, force equals mass times acceleration. When they're at top of the hill, and they need to get a push to get the Jeep going. So I guess gravity as well.
Yeah. And even as basic as like things getting pushed, things getting pulled. There's a lot of motion that kind of happens through this story in a Jeep. And so I kind of, as I said, it's one of my daughter's favorite stories. And it's also kind of a good introduction, I think, into the thing that we're going to do for the next while in class. And so you'll notice in our files today that there actually is a sheep in a Jeep folder. And this is actually an entire unit built around this story for 3rd and 4th graders, specifically around force and motion using ramps. And that's what we're gonna do. I wanna give you all a chance. We're gonna put you all in groups and we're gonna do a couple of these tasks. And so what you're gonna need, as I said, like something that rolls, that can roll down an incline. So if, we'll need 1 or 2 of you in each group to have kind of like one of those Matchbox cars. I grew up, I have to kind of like pause when I think about that because we grew up calling them dickies when I was a kid. And my wife is like, that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. That must be a Canadian thing. So I've been calling them Matchbox cars. I don't know if you guys have like different terms. And so have something that rolls. I want to have like a couple of books so that you can kind of like build up an incline and then another book for the incline or something along those lines. And then if you have something that you can measure, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna have these things roll down at different inclines and then we're gonna measure how far they go. And so what we're gonna do, and I have kind of all the directions I'll show you in a second. I want you to, on your own, kind of read the first 2 pages of this sheep in a Jeep activity on your own. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna do 2 of the activities, 2 of the tasks. And then we're going to talk about them. So I think it's on page. I'm so sorry for the scrolling. We're going to do Checkpoint Lab Part A. And again, set it up as best as you can. Again, whenever I do this activity, I always have all the stuff ready for you. But we can't do that right now. And so Part A is going to be around motion and forces. And it's just going to ask you a couple of questions. And then you're going to do Checkpoint Part B, where you're going to use the ramp at 2 different heights. And then again, there's going to be a couple of questions to ask. And that's it. And so in terms of, let me kind of show again. I have kind of the directions here on slide 10. So kind of have a chance to kind of read page 191 and 192. And then you're going to go through in your groups and do checkpoint A and B as best as you can, which are pages 201 to 203. I've kind of set up like an example of the things that you might do in terms of the trials on slide 11. And I just want you to have a chance to kind of play and dive in and think about this activity in terms of like the different tasks, the different things I'm asking you to do. Does anyone have any questions? What time is it? Yeah, we're getting there. Let's say that we're going to do maybe about 20 minutes to get a chance to do that. And so I'm going to put you into groups. And then I'm going to kind of like just pop in and out to make sure that all the groups have someone that actually has the materials needed to go through and do the task. And then if not, I'll do some changing around. I think I might do 3 groups. That might be the best way to go about doing it, especially since we only have 9 today. That'll be 3 in a group. So hop into your breakout groups and just have some time, have some fun, play, and I'll do a check-in to make sure that folks have what they need.
sizes and just like, I don't know, maybe works for the room
Perfect. Yeah.
and we can measure.
Someone,
Yeah.
someone in here have all the things you need?
Yeah.
Cool. Does one person have? We have what we need.
Yeah, I have some stuff here.
Cool. All right. Good luck. Does someone have what we need?
Yep, Austin's got
Yeah.
it.
Got some.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have fun. Enjoy.
put something in front of it. Is that okay? Or I
Uh,
just let it go down and check. How far is
says,
it?
oh, it says if it falls off before reaching the bottom, do over.
Okay, so let me just go
Maybe you
back.
just let it go off the table and see how far off the table it goes too. I don't know.
Yeah, let me try. I think it's, oops, it's stuck with the computer. Let's try again. Yeah, it's like that far. Let me check. With centimeter? And do we count the ramp also, or just where it's down the ramp? What do you think?
I think for how I'm, go ahead.
From
I
here
was
or that?
at the very end of the ramp.
That's what I thought
Okay,
too.
so it's around 22 centimeter.
Trial 1, 22.
Hey
That's
folks,
all.
just doing a quick check-in. How's it going?
Good.
Good. I think we're moving along.
How much longer would you like? This isn't a like hurry up. I just want to know how much time you'd like to do.
No more than 10 minutes, probably. I don't know. At least 5, maybe 10.
10 minutes. That works. Thanks. Good.
That's Milo. I couldn't afford the class ring, so I got a cat named after the mascot.
Oh, nice. We needed a longer ramp.
Totally. The first group said that they wanted about 10 more minutes. Does that sound good?
Are we just doing A and B, parts A and B?
Yeah, just A and B.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll need that much.
Yeah,
but-
we probably don't need that much time.
All right. Well, you know, you can come back in 5 or so, or whenever you're done. If you want to just come back, and then I'll keep you updated. Thanks. Enjoy.
I can't remember what he said.
I think maybe so.
Hey folks, just doing a quick check-in. How much more time would y'all like?
We just wrapped it up.
Okay, we might do about 5 more minutes because some folks wanted a little bit more time, but I just wanted to check in. So you guys can come back, but I'll send y'all a message saying about 5 more minutes.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So does it matter that we use a different ramp from the 5 centimeters to the 710? Okay.
No, there's no way to really kind of, that's why I said kind of the best of our ability. I have all the kind of the tools on campus to be able to kind of like do it exactly, but I also have, they have like little like Guardians of the Galaxy toys on top of them that are supposed to be the sheep. Hey everybody, welcome back. And so the way I'd like to kind of set this up now is I have some kind of reflection questions here, kind of about what we learned. But I'd like you all to really dive into and focus and build a discussion on your own. So I'm gonna kind of back off. I might interject for the most part, but, and I know I want us to think about how to do this in a Zoom and how this works. I just want you all to like lead your own discussion about, you know, was this a good example of kind of what we've been talking about in terms of inquiry? I know I put like, how is this lesson a good example, but we might disagree. What was some of the math and science that we learned that happened? You know, what kind of a task was it? We talked about rich tasks a little while ago. Was this rich, and how and why? Was this inquiry, how and why? But I want you all to just kind of like have a chance to be able to chat for, let's kind of, we'll see how it goes, maybe 7 or so minutes, about your learning experiences across the 3 different groups. And you don't have to stick to those questions. You can talk about anything you want, but I want to get a sense of what happened in terms of learning when we get to play with sheep.
Yeah, I thought this was a pretty cool activity. We started off kind of following the directions on the sheep in a Jeep handout there, but like quickly, like we started asking other questions, like does the ramp size matter? I noticed my little snowmobile started to spin out when I switched over to the higher ramp, so we had to like do some rearrangements, finagling to try to get a nice smooth run with the higher ramp. So there's like a lot of exchanging ideas and trial and error. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one thing, kind of like what Jesse just said, you'd learn when you're doing a task like this for kids as well, is that, you know, the trial and error thing is going to happen regardless of what you think beforehand. So your snowmobile is going to spin out, like my little car would go and nosedive and not go anywhere a couple times. You'd have to keep trying to get it to work. So it's not going to be something that's going to work initially every single time. So you're going to have to, you know, sit there and do it again and see if you can get a result, and keep doing it until you can get a result.
And even
What-
giving the students the freedom to not record every single trial, I think is cool because it kind of gets them to thinking of why didn't I record that? Like, why wouldn't that be part of this experiment? Like, why would that alter the data? All that kind of stuff. So that was like a cool thing that we got to decide what we were recording and not.
I was going to say something similar along the lines of what Aubrey was just talking about. Like, can we use this as an opportunity to discuss outliers and how that impacts like results? You know, and I mean, at such a, I don't know, a kindergarten through fourth grade level, I don't know if that would be an appropriate topic, but you know, I feel like when I was in the lab, it was always about record everything and then kind of identify, oh yeah, that's definitely an outlier, and how that averages out, and or you can discount it. But that was kind of cool. I agree.
I think though, going off what Greg said, I think you use it as an opportunity to show students that there's learning in the classroom, and then there's, that life is you're kind of learning a simplified version of life. Life is more complicated, so that's where those outliers and things like that come into play, maybe.
Well, and then maybe even to kind of investigate, is there a reason as to why those outliers happen? Kind of like, again, what Jesse said is, snowmobiles spun out, the steeper the incline, I'm guessing, when you rose the ramp, and, is there a reason why that spin out would happen, and going scientifically into it, which might be above, fourth graders' heads, but, like with the frictional force attributed to the normal force decreasing as you increase the incline, like, would they kind of have a fundamental grasp of that just by seeing it and without the mathematical terms put into it? Like, we'd be like, oh, well, when you have this steeper of an incline, it's going to spin out and have less traction to the ramp or whatever, and maybe they could pertain or elaborate that into their own lives. Like, when you're standing on a steep hill, you probably can slide out a lot easier than if you're standing on a flatter piece of ground.
Was this open-ended?
I feel like for some people it would be a little bit more open-ended than others. Like Jesse was talking about earlier, his group came up with a lot of other questions, things that they were curious about when they were doing the experiment. But I know, like, when I was a kid, maybe even a little bit now, I am a strict, I need to follow this rule. If it doesn't say it on the paper, we can't do it, guys. So I think maybe some people would be a little bit more like that. Maybe not kids, but I don't know. I guess, peculiar.
I think that's a good point, because I mean, it was very open-ended for me, and I was in Jesse's group. We did have a lot of questions like, what's the optimal ramp angle and things like that. But yeah, I can see where for other people that aren't thinking like I am, that didn't have those questions, maybe it's just kind of a dead end, more of a dead end thing.
It's interesting kind of from a math perspective, because it definitely has students dive into the ideas of like sampling and collecting data and averaging data, and what does that actually mean. But it doesn't, it asks some questions connected with that, but not the main focus. The main focus here is motion, as it should be. But we can learn about data through motion, or vice versa.
Well, and it can kind of be considered. Oh, sorry.
No. I want to hear from you all.
Well, I was going to say it can kind of also be considered open-ended in the sense of how everyone chose the materials they were going to use. Like what kind of car did you use, and what kind of ramp did you use, and was there a lip at the end of the ramp, or did it, meet flushly to the surface it was going to roll onto? Yeah,
absolutely. Was it interesting? Was it fun to kind of play? Was it a cool activity? Wonderful. Well, thank you all for sharing and playing for a little bit as we start diving into tasks. I think what we'll probably do is wrap up around here, because the next activity is for us to dive in and start thinking about this activity connected to, and I really want to get your thoughts on your thoughts about universal design after having a chance to go through the discussion on Sunday. So I think what we'll do is on Thursday, we'll start back up with this and we'll dive into this activity again and how that kind of connects to the multiple means of representation, action, things along those lines, what you all had a chance to write about on Sunday. And then we'll dive into like how demanding tasks are, and we'll take a look at this one for a little bit, but also spend some time looking at some other tasks and what does it mean to have a task that's demanding as we start building up. So I think that's our plan for Thursday. So we'll come back to Sheep in a Jeep when we chat at the beginning of Thursday, and then we'll dive into demanding tasks, and then we'll have some time to do some review and share out our inquiry journals. So if that's it, if there aren't any other questions, you can stay on for a minute and ask. If not, have a wonderful rest of the day, and I'll see you all on Thursday. The blog is already up and running for Thursday morning, so if you wanna, you can dive into that whenever, and otherwise we'll sit and chat when we get together then.
Bye, Dennis. Thank you, and be well.
You too.
Better. Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem. Have a great day, folks.
I had a question. So like when you were talking about going into a classroom, so like starting your internship, so say the teacher didn't necessarily implement kind of like group work, do you just go with that then?
It's a balance. Here are my thoughts. The teacher may not give you a lot of opportunity to do otherwise because it's their classroom. So there's a couple of, it's kind of delicate. So what you need to do is you need to think about a couple of things. If they're allow you to kind of play a little bit, do some group work a couple of times before like a formal observation. Start building the norm yourself. So kind of say, you know what, like in a month, I have this assignment for my like class with Dr. Verma, because I'm assuming you're probably taking Gita's class in the fall. For that, I probably want to do some group work. Do you think that you can let me kind of like do a little bit of planning with you and let me kind of maybe even take over like a 15-minute group work activity somewhere in a couple of times before I do that, so the students get used to it? And I mean, it's not the end of the world if you just jump in and do it. Just know that there's a good chance that they're going to push back and not going to want to do it, because they don't want to, like, if they've just been like given information for 2 months and then you turn around and say, oh, you're actually going to create your own information this time, they're going to be annoyed as hell and they're going to push back. And it's not their fault. And I'm saying this as it's a guarantee. It's not a guarantee, but I've seen it happen again and again and again. And so just like know that going into it is that it may not go the way that you want it to, and that's okay. That's fine, right? As long as you, and you know, like you're not going to be graded on like, did it go well? You're going to be also graded on like, what did I learn from it? What did I learn about student learning and from teaching in that moment? That's an important reflection point. But if you can, and if you're thinking about it, try to build in some opportunities so it's not the first time that they do it.
Would you maybe suggest like just kind of even starting off with them just discussing with each other rather than even doing an activity? Like, hey, you know, like if you, because I guess I wouldn't know how the classroom is oriented, like if they'd have just single desks or if it's going to be shared desks, or, you know, like where you could break like each desk discuss, or, you know, discuss.
And so, and it could be as simple as like starting off with, you have them like ask your teacher, CT, if you could do an intro, like warm-up activity, and then have the students do like a think, pair, share. Right? So you could start it off really easy and just be like, do the activity on your own, talk to the person next to you about it, and then talk about how you're going to share it together. Right? That's a very easy like not stressful. You're not thinking about like group dynamics. We're going to dive into group dynamics in the next couple of weeks and how we think about group work. I'd want to do that on the first day. We just haven't had the time to. So I've been trying to think about, because I think it's one of the most important things we can talk about probably again this semester. But yeah, you can start off like pretty low risk and just kind of say, talk to the person next to you, because the two of you are going to, a couple of you are going to share out what you get for the warm up, and then build into like, how do we build group conversations from there?
Okay. Well, then I was wondering like kind of what your thoughts were. So like as a teacher, like if I'm running my own class, because I would really like to have group oriented type classroom, community style, whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
Would you like basically, I was kind of contemplating, would you want to keep a group together the entire time? Like, or would you keep them together maybe for like a couple weeks and then have them switch into another group so they interact with others? Like just so maybe
it's
like
going to depend. It'll depend on who you have. It'll depend on your students. I've seen it done so many different ways. I've seen like opportunities where like they keep the same groups together through the entire year and they almost like compete for like, you know, throughout the year. And then I've seen other times where you're just kind of like switch it up every couple of weeks, or, you know, I never do it the same here. And I haven't talked much about how I've been setting it up. Sometimes I've been kind of randomly sending them out. But I do, that's why I want to make sure we have that conversation. I think that's important. But it's going to depend on like the climate of the classroom, the school, who your students are, who you are. But I think it's important, and I would call that kind of like student-centered, right? Because if you set up more opportunities where they're going to be working in pairs or in groups, then you're not just the one that's talking. You're not just the one that's doing all the work. You're letting them do the work, and that frees you up to be able to kind of walk around and learn what they're actually learning. If you're up at the front of the class the whole time, I had like an hour-long conversation with Jesse yesterday about this. He wanted to chat, and I said, you know, if you're up there up at the front of the class talking, then you don't know what they're learning.
Yeah,
you have no idea. And I said, like, often, and this isn't necessarily bad, it's something that needs we work on, but a lot of people when they start their student teaching are tethered to that smartboard. They're almost like terrified to leave it. It's like a safety net. Now, again, I did the same thing, but if you're up there, what are you learning about what your students are doing?
Yeah,
nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Well, and
so oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say,
Yeah.
I think it also is probably good for the students to kind of build trust